Welcome, everyone. We're so happy you're here to join us, and please feel free to have your screen on if you would like to do that. We're going to be starting momentarily. What we're going to do, well, first of all, I'll tell you, my name is Darcy Elkson, and we are working on a project at our network, which focuses on advocacy. And we had some requirements of our grant that we bring in presenters. And we have had a presenter with us from Pennsylvania. And these are two people from Disability Rights Nebraska that I'm going to introduce you to, who I've worked with for a very long time. And I just know the level of their work. And I thought it would be interesting for us in Pennsylvania to hear from somebody else in another state. So this presentation, John and Brad, can you come on, like open your camera for us so I can introduce you?
My camera's on. Yeah, there you go.
Sorry about that.
Okay, where are you? I guess we have a lot of people, so that's why I can't see you.
We do.
Courtney, can you like bring John front and center? I can't see him. And John, while we're trying to,
When I talk, you'll start. You'll see
okay.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, right here, we see you. So John is at the very top of the screen, and he has worked as a paid advocate with Disability Rights Nebraska. He recently retired, and he is still working as an advocate for people who he knows on a voluntary basis. So I've known him for a very long time, and I've always admired his fortitude and his work and the way he really stands by people and really has committed his life to advocacy. Brad is up in the, if you're facing the screen right-hand corner there, he just waved with the purple background. And Brad works currently and has worked for a long time at Disability Rights Nebraska. And Brad has worked very hard with legislators. That's his job. He advocates for things to happen in Nebraska with the legislators. And I thought, he has so much experience with this that it would be good for us to learn from him. And one of the things that he has been doing for a number of years is every year, or maybe more than that, he has interns that come to him that he teaches to talk to legislators. And I thought, well, that is just perfect for us with the work that we are doing. So we warmly welcome both of you here. One of the things well, there's many things that I love about John and Brad, but they're both animal people. And so John has this gorgeous little dog sleeping back there. And Brad has two cats. And Brad, what are the names of your cats?
Smoochie McTwist and Squeaky Voodoo.
So I just love those names. So this workshop is being sponsored by Vision for Equality and the Pennsylvania Family Network, and we are really glad to have you here. We welcome you. Because we have so many people here, we're not really going to be able to have conversation because the presenters don't have a lot of time. You may write in the chat, and we can talk together through the chat. The first hour will be John, and John is going to talk about the history of self-advocacy, or People First, as it was called in those days, in Nebraska. And then he's going to share some lessons with us. So I think it will be really interesting for us to listen to what John talks about the development of People First, and then what were some of the mistakes that were made, because hopefully in the projects that we are all involved in advocacy, we can avoid some of those mistakes. And Brad will be talking the second hour, and Brad will, of course, be talking about talking to legislators and how to prepare for that and giving us some good examples of people he's seen who have learned how to do that. Okay, so I think with that, we're ready. Does anybody else want to say anything? Okay, well, John, I'm going to
Okay.
turn it over to you.
Beautiful. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And I just wanted to let you know how honored I am to be a part of this very exciting workshop and to talk to you about the lessons of the time I spent with People First in Nebraska. When Darcy asked me to be a part of this workshop, I was really excited to present this because I haven't talked about it for a long time. So I'm excited to just share that with you. It's a great story too, on top of it all. Darcy has shared with me how much positive energy has come from this group, and I'm really excited to hear about what you're going to be doing and how this is going to be moving forward. So I can't wait to hear what's going on. As Darcy was alluding to or saying that, we first met each other in 1987. I'd love to get a show of hands on how many people were even alive in 1987, but we're not going to do that. Clearly, yeah, okay, thank you, Brad, for that. There's clearly, a very, very dear friend with whom I've grown to have a very close relationship, and I love and admire. So, and over the years, there have been a number of people who had an impact on the way I think about things and the way I present and just kind of information in general. And I've run into a number of incredible presenters and teachers, but I would have to say that Darcy, of course, is one of the most gifted teachers I have ever run into. And you know why that is because she takes what can be very, very difficult subject matter and explain it in a way so that everybody gets it, which makes information accessible for everyone. And that is just such an important thing. And so, and it's such a remarkable gift. And you're so lucky to have her in Pennsylvania, is what I would say. So I am going to start with let's see if this goes well. Okay, so everybody should be seeing the one uh, the one piece, my time with People First in Nebraska. You don't see anything else up, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect.
And Darcy, you told me, and I agree, that if you want me to explain more, or if you want to stop and talk about something a little bit more, you're gonna interrupt me and say, "Hey, we need to do this." So that was the agreed upon kind of way we're going to go at this. The first thing I wanted to to share with you is this piece about, where in the world is Nebraska? And I ask that question all the time, folks. And here you see, Pennsylvania was one of the 13 original colonies. It was a foundational piece of what became this nation, and started many, many, many years ago, hundreds of years ago, and has 13 million people in it. On the screen up here, you see Pennsylvania, and the state is in red. I'm not technologically clever enough to do everything all at the same time, but I put up two maps. Nebraska began as a territory and was founded in 1867. So it's relatively new to the scene, and it has 2 million people this day and age, and that's probably anyway, it's counting everybody. And so the places where we live are very different. You have two huge cities and a number of kind of medium cities. We have two kind of bigger medium cities, and that's pretty much it. It's a very agricultural state. So the look of the two places is really quite different. I had the chance to drive across Pennsylvania, and it's just a gorgeous state. I wanted to let you all know that. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the history of People First. And it began we think it began in Sweden in the 1960s. And it actually began as what they called leisure clubs. So these are clubs where people would get together, and, they weren't, controlled by staff people. It would be on their own to spend time together with each other. This is people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, which was revolutionary, extremely rare in those days, because people were either living with their families or living in institutions where nothing could happen. Nothing happened for people. In Sweden, they also developed a statement about how they wanted to be treated. And that was early on. That was in 68 or 70, where there was this statement issued saying, we want to be treated equally and fairly like all other people. So, that was the very first notion of the idea of People First. The idea spread to Great Britain and Canada, and there was a group from Oregon in 1973 that went up to a convention in Canada, and they were upset because they felt like the staff were dominating. They were in control of everything. And they basically went back home and said, this isn't the way People First should be, and that's where it really got its energy from, where People First really began. And so the idea of self-advocacy organizations began to spread around the country. And then in 1991, this is after a number of states, including Pennsylvania, Nebraska, Illinois, there's a number of states that had very strong self-advocacy or People First organizations. A national organization came together with a national board of directors representing the various states where People First organizations were. And actually, there was a Nebraskan involved in that activity. Her name was Bonnie Schultz, and I'm going to talk about Bonnie in a few minutes. But that was really quite an honor for Bonnie to be chosen one of the original advisors to the First National group. I know Darcy has told me that you have been spending time learning about self-advocacy and People First. And I understand that you've spent some time looking at the Minnesota materials, which is really exciting. And you've probably seen this already, but I wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page regarding what People First is and what it isn't, okay? So People First is, and this comes from the Minnesota materials, is a civil rights movement. And, that's a really, really important thing. You oftentimes hear civil rights, when it's referred to African-American people, women, gay rights, a lot of that stuff, but it had never really been applied to people with disabilities. And so they took that language and they applied it, they embraced it. It is about people speaking up, rather than being forced to be quiet, to not be heard. It was about everyone being capable of doing something. So, even if people were involved, people with intellectual or developmental disabilities were involved probably before this time. The people who would be involved would be people that others, maybe the professionals, would say, are capable of doing that. So they'd leave out tons and tons of people with more significant disabilities. And so this says, and it's a very, very revolutionary idea, is that everyone is capable of something. And that is so important. It's really, there's a personal piece to this, is about making your case for what you want. Because a lot of times people aren't even asked what they want, much less, anything else. People with disabilities have, up until this point in time, really weren't asked what they wanted or what their future was like. And so this was another revolutionary idea. Realizing that you're not alone, bringing people together and encouraging people to form connections and friendships and to learn that other people are having the same struggles and coming together, and also becoming powerful in that group together. Knowing your strengths and being proud and feeling strong. And I'm sure this is one of the key things that you're thinking about right now, is that everybody comes with strengths and everyone needs to be proud of that. And it's something that we need to feel strongly about. It, no matter what your situation is, if you have a disability, if you don't, whatever, we all need to be very, very grateful to know that we come with strengths.
Mhm.
Taking risks and trying new things was another piece of the People First, description. So, up until this point in time, people with disabilities, people were housed in huge institutions, because people said, well, for one thing, they didn't want people around them, but for the other thing, that they said, well, they're going to be safer here. The institution in Nebraska had a 4-foot swimming pool, so no one could ever drown in it. This is, imagine that, a swimming pool that's only 4 feet deep. And it was all around the issue of making sure that people were safe and didn't have weren't going to be harmed in any which way, shape, and form. And so this whole idea of trying new things and taking risks, is really been talked about within the People First movement. Going after your dreams. A lot of times people aren't even encouraged to have dreams, to think about what the future might look like. And so this opens up that key thing that we all share as human beings. We all have dreams, we all have desires. Making decisions. Again, before this idea of people really raising their voice, having their voice heard, other people made decisions regarding every last thing a person with a disability did. People had no power over the decisions that were made about them, where they live, where they work, who they hang out with, all that sort of stuff. Making mistakes and learning from them is an enormous, enormous, important way that we all develop as human beings. And you can't, it's sort of like the institution in the 4-foot pool. If you only have a 4-foot pool, you're never probably going to learn how to swim. And part of this is, people really need to be able to have a chance to make mistakes. After all, that's how I learn, that's how Darcy learns, that's how everybody learns. And then, we make mistakes and then we learn from them. Mistakes are really the best learning tool around. When things are perfect, you can just sit there and say, well, they're perfect. But when something has gone awry, when something hasn't gone well, and then, that's a really important thing to look at. Managing your emotions so that others can hear what you have to say. I looked at this language a little bit and I thought, but I think what they meant by this is, I think people get really backed up when people don't listen to them. The people I've known who have disabilities, other people have never listened to them, really get angry or very sad about the fact that no one listens to them. And so this is kind of one of these things where, through support within, from your peers and from other members of People First who are also going down the same path, saying, we've got to learn how to present ourselves in a way so other people really hear us, so that doesn't get in the way of everything else. And being curious and asking questions. And, more often than not, people aren't asked if they have any questions about anything. It's kind of ridiculous to think about that, So um, when you look at all these descriptions of what makes People First, it is such a powerful thing. And it's such a wonderful and a beautiful thing. And I'm glad you're studying it. And, there's going to be people who will sit back, and say, oh, yeah, that sounds like a really great idea. But when they get down to the nub of it all, and people start really speaking out, they may not be so thrilled that people are speaking out. I mean, there could be a lot of kickback from that. I need to. So, okay, so we're going to talk about the history of People First of Nebraska. Nebraska was an early starter in the Yeah, Darcy, go ahead.
Oh, no,
Oh, I thought you were.
I just. Oh, man.
Don't you dare do that, yeah. So everything so far making sense? Just want to make sure people are kind of following so far. Looks good. Okay, good. Okay, so now we're going to get on the part that I'm really excited about, which is, I'm not excited about all of it, but I'm really excited about the development of and the history of People First in Nebraska. So there was this guy by the name of Ray Loomis, who was placed in the Beatrice State Developmental Center, and at its height, there were 2,600 people living there. Now, again, compared to the Pennsylvania institutions, that's probably not a large number. But you're talking about a state with a small population. And, Beatrice is a dump. It was a terrible place for people to live. And there were, studies about what was going on there. Well, Darcy's mentor, and I'm sure, hopefully she's talked, and I know she's talked about Dr. Wolfensberger, just happened to be in Nebraska and led a group of parents through this process, which resulted in reducing the size of the terrible state institution and creating supports and community supports and services in the community. And so Ray Loomis, who was at Beatrice, said Project One was actually developing the supports in the community. For him, Project Two was about living in the community. And he said this in 1975. And if you listen to that quote that he has here, and this idea, I just think it's so powerful. So if you think you're handicapped, and remember, this is the language of, some guy that probably, I think he was in the institution for 14, 15 years. He went in as a young man. This is a long time ago, eons ago, 50 years ago. But he said, if you think you're handicapped, you might as well stay indoors. If you think you're a person first, then come out and tell the world. And it was like the charge that he led. It was a very powerful statement. And as a result, he was the creator, the founder of Project Two in Omaha, which was a self-advocacy organizer. So, and I've read some stuff about him, and one of the things I just wanted to share with you was he talked about him being a man of hopes and dreams. And I think that there is no way that you could praise somebody more than saying, he spent formative years in a hellhole, and came out of it and said, I have a huge dream of the things of living a big life in the community with supports and friends, and I want to bring people together to do that. So next up, and I have a picture of Ollie, and I never had the chance to meet Ray Loomis. He had passed away before I began working. But I met Ollie Webb, and Ollie, this is just such an amazing story. How it goes is that she and her family were migrant farm workers in western part of Nebraska. Now, western part of Nebraska is high desert. It's a place where you could grow sugar beets and stuff like that. And so she was the youngest of 13 children, and the whole family was doing migrant farm work. I mean, when I told this to Darcy the other day, we were just, it's just unbelievable. And so what happened, and I'm not sure what exactly happened, but somehow she was separated from her family and ended up, guess where? In the Beatrice State Developmental Center in Beatrice, Nebraska. That'd be about 450 miles away, nowhere with no family in sight. And she stayed there. And the ward she was on, she was able to go to a ward where the babies, the little babies with disabilities that were institutionalized were placed, and little children. And so she spent a good deal of her time doing that while in the institution. And in the early 70s, when she left the state institution to go live in Omaha, and she had no connections with Omaha, she got a job working at a place that she retired from 37 years later. It was the Omaha Field Club. Beloved person, got married, had a baby, bought a house, all that stuff is there. So, but what I will tell you, both of Ray Loomis and Ollie Webb, is anytime anybody would bring up life at the Beatrice State Developmental Center, you would never find two more clear people about what kind of devastating impact that has on a person to be placed in a place like that. Very, very, very powerful. And then here's another person that I got to know really, really well, and a huge impact on Nebraska. These, and Ray and Ollie and Nancy all have disabilities, really powerful leaders of People First of Nebraska, but they were really, their feet were in the People First clay of the world. They knew what it was, and they knew what they were doing. There's a great picture here of Nancy looking at then Bob Kerrey, who was our governor, a young guy. And this is probably, in that great, you look at that picture and it's like, she's almost looking at him like, you better do this, It wasn't that way, but I love that. I love that picture. So Nancy, began working. This is before she was barely getting involved with People First of Lincoln. And she found out that state statutes, this would have been in 83, 84, maybe even earlier than that, had tons, the laws of the state, forgive me, but they're called statutes, but the laws of the state had language in them that referred to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities as idiots and morons and worse. It just was all over the place. And I think this was repeated. It's not just in Nebraska. It was in Pennsylvania and all over the country. Terrible ways that people were referred to. And Nancy, began to get involved People First of Lincoln in this effort, along with the ARC of Nebraska at the time. And then there was a state senator's son who also belonged to People First of Nebraska. And they passed a bill. Nancy actually got to read it on the floor of the legislature, you know, striking all that horrible language. Now, what Nancy told me is she said they wanted to get it to say people with developmental disabilities, and they could only move it to people with mental retardation. And again, that's a insulting language, but it was 1982 or 83. It was really early on. And eventually, I hope that language has changed. This is a picture of Cheryl P. Wininski. Again, Cheryl has a pretty significant disability who had a lot to say, was a leader of People First as well. And there's Bob Carey back in his young days. And then this was at the People First convention. This is Senator Seek, and that was Dave Powell, who was the director of the ARC. And People First awarded them plaques saying thank you for all the work you did to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about legislative advocacy, and this is People First. It's just incredible. Okay, so I want to talk.
John,
Yes.
I just
Yes.
love the fact that the people with disabilities were giving the plaques to
Absolutely.
people, or who are in the big positions.
Yeah.
So, because it's usually the other way around. So I'm
Oh,
just by
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Everybody here had a disability with Bob Carey sitting down, and they sat on the steps because Cheryl P. Wininski was there. So it was like, okay, here we go, And then again, I love this look uh, of Nancy. It's a great photo. Oh, it's a great photo. It's like, oh, yeah. So the leaders were there, and they were ready and raring to go because of their experiences of what they had experienced. So anybody would say something positive about the state institution, Ollie would get up and just read them the riot act. I mean, there was no doubt about it. It's like, big life can't come from being in a place like that. But you also need important allies and advocates too. And fortunately, at that time in Nebraska, we had several. We had some really, really strong key people. So I thought of this is Shirley Dean, who passed away several years ago, and whom I love and adore is the only thing I can say about it. So a kind and thoughtful, really smart person who was a humble person. She was a worker bee and not a show horse, is what I always thought. She made things happen. And she felt so strongly about People First in Nebraska because she had really deep, meaningful, personal relationships with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And a lot of people who had left the institution to go live in the community. I mean, she was, beside people during that whole time. And I'll get to the convention in just a little bit. It was the purpose of her life, I will say, with Shirley Dean. And I'm going to use the word radical a lot today because it is a radical idea. That means it identifies the root, and People First identifies the root of the problem, which is, people not being treated equally. And Shirley believed in equality of all people, but especially people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and, stood in that ground clearly. The next person is Tom Miller, who was also instrumental in supporting People First in Nebraska. And Tom had deep personal connections as well. And his daughter had an intellectual disability. And I'll tell you a story about Tom that he told me. He was involved going to Beatrice State Developmental Center and taking people to the first group home that was created after community services started. So he went to Beatrice State Developmental Center and gave people a ride back to Omaha to live in the community. And so that affected him, very, very much. He's passionate, and Tom was incredibly fun and irreverent, and in a lot of ways. But you need people like that, huh? So, and then finally, I was gonna talk to you about Bonnie Schultz. So Bonnie was Bonnie and Shirley were the first advisors of People First in Nebraska. And she and Paul Williams wrote the book We Can Speak for Ourselves. I mean, it was also, a lot of it was about Project 2 in Omaha. And then she also worked at the Center for Human Development at Syracuse University. So there's information from that period. But Bonnie was smart, a planner, a visionary, again, deeply committed, and again, she was then tapped to be the first advisor of Self-Advocates Becoming Empowered, this self-advocacy, national self-advocacy organization, People First group. And so we had these three really, really strong people to stand with the leaders of People First to guide People First Nebraska, to guide and to grow People First in Nebraska. So, what I know about People First in the early days is that it was formed. There were several independent People First organizations in various cities. And this is the Ray Loomis days, and they brought together these individual chapters, and they had a convention. And so they began by doing that, maybe a few chapters in the beginning, and then that just kind of grew and grew, and each chapter would elect a representative who would be on the board, the state board of People First of Nebraska. And when I came on the scene, Shirley Dean and Bonnie Schultz were the advisors. This is an old picture of me with hair. Okay, might as well get over laughing about it. I thought, you want to give people a chuckle. It's 40 years old, and if you notice on this picture, it's a really old computer. I mean, and guess what? There was one computer in an office with 20 people, and it was up front. And you notice I also was smoking at the time. There's an ashtray. I mean, you can't, it really dates how long ago this is, right? So, and you can all laugh now. It's a good place to laugh. So, when I came on the scene, my responsibilities were to attend People First in Nebraska board meetings, to support Shirley Dean as the advisor, and to help organize the annual convention. And this is where we get into having fun. And speaking of conventions, we come to the annual convention. So the convention was usually 3 days. It took place over Columbus Day holiday. It would always be in the fall. And, people would come together from chapters, and some people would have support people with them. Other people would just come on their own. And there's, there were 12 chapters then, and it would always start off with an annual meeting, welcoming everybody to the event. I guess the convention would begin with the welcoming everybody. And as you see, people were paying really careful attention, but a lot of people would go to the bar and they'd spend their time in the bar rather than going to the annual meeting. And guess what? They got to do that. That's no one's there telling people what to do. And on this right-hand screen, if you see this guy standing there, his name is Larry. Larry had strong opinions about everything and would argue till the cows come marching home. And so there he's giving Nancy the business. If you can see that, it's going on. I thought that was a great picture. One of the things when we got into the annual meeting is it was called open microphone. And so this is to understand, to get to know and understand the concerns of the membership. So this is an opportunity. And some people would just, say, I got a job this year, and everybody would clap and they'd love it, or they moved into their own apartment. But other people would get up and say, transportation is just a nightmare where I live, or, somebody's being mean to me, And so so the Nancy and other people, leaders, would walk around the room, and when someone would raise their hand, we eventually had a line that would form and people would go up and talk about what was important to them. Well, we began taking notes as a result of this open microphone thing, because it seemed like maybe that's where People First could do some work, or get a lead from the people who were talking to us at the convention, to kind of say, transportation is a big issue. Well, what could you do? Or, there's a whole ton of things that could be going on there. I love this because this was really a great opportunity for people to say what they wanted to say. We also, at this convention, the main speaker, and this is Nancy Ward and Tia Nels. Tia Nels is a leader from People First of Illinois. So the People First in Nebraska became involved with the other People First organizations. Speaking for Ourselves was the one in Pennsylvania. Became involved with all the other People First organizations. And Hank Bersani, who is this guy in the middle, it's an inappropriate picture, but they were messing with him. And Hank Bersani was, just really, really well-known guy who was a deep thinker about, rights for people who had been left out by the community. And so he came to speak to the membership of the convention. It was a wonderful thing. And, he's top notch is what I would say. He's an important speaker to have come. Tom Miller, then over here on the right, I can't remember what his presentation was about, but he spoke as well. And for whatever it was very, very powerful. So over the years, every year there'd be a different main speaker, and more often than not, they come from outside of Nebraska. I shared this with Darcy the other day, the story about this. So in 1986, I keep on saying this takes us back a long time ago. And, I didn't have a camera every year to record everything. I wish I had, but I didn't. I hate taking pictures and being in them. So there was, in 1986, at the convention, we were having a governor's race in another month. And Nebraska made the news that year because it had two women running against one another, a woman on the Democratic ticket and a woman on the Republican ticket. And so we thought, well, why don't we have the candidates come and present their views about disability and about the world in general to the membership. And so here's a picture of Helen Busalis, who was the Democrat who ran. And they brought long signs and everything. I mean, they had, 300-400 people there. And they also, the Republican, Kay Orr, sent a representative to talk about it. And it was a very serious thing. And I thought, what a great time to say to people, we're here. hello, and what are you gonna do? And I think we sent them in advance, some things to think about, some questions in advance because they're going to be talking. And we wanted to know what were their views, what were they planning on doing regarding people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Mhm.
One of the things that happened at the convention too, after I guess that took place sometime in the morning and then later in the afternoon after the annual meeting, is each chapter would organize a chapter presentation, and it'd be on lots and lots of different issues. I remember chapters talking about working with their city council to make their town more accessible, or thinking about work, or thinking about, a whole host of things. Or maybe they had a really good supporter, or a great supporter, or supported employment, whatever it was at the time, something that was more forward thinking. Somebody could come and present. And that was a really important thing, because people had to prepare for that and present. And so yeah, it was very, very good. Now, see, the banquet was held on Saturday night, and it was a big deal. Everybody got dressed up. And at the banquet, if there was an election, the new officers were introduced. And so they had an election within the board of People First. And so here were the new people that were the president, and I think, anyway, I can't remember the specific offices. And then also presented during the banquet was the Chapter of the Year Award. So it was called the Shirley Dean Chapter of the Year Award. And we, wanted to honor Shirley in a powerful way, because she spent so much time with People First in Nebraska. And so the chapter that had done a lot, of action and activity, was honored there. Then after the annual meeting, and then we do the banquet, and then it was all fun and dancing. People got the groove on in one way or another, and stayed up way too late and had way too much fun. And it was a great time was had by all, is the only thing I can say. And here's a picture of Al in modeling t-shirts. So one of the things to raise money for People First was to design and then to print t-shirts with the theme of the convention.
Hmm.
Now, to do all this entire convention, the board would meet for 2 days. We'd have to have a 2-day meeting. So people would have to sleep over to go through the whole convention. And that would be making a decision on what you're going to call this convention this year. Who's going to be the main speaker? Who's going to do the chapter presentations? If there's an election for officers, how is that going to go? So we had to go through all of that to get ready. So this took a really, really long time, and tons and tons of planning.
Right.
Yeah, more than I can. There was nothing left to chance, actually. So here are the highlights of People First in Nebraska. I was going to tell you, and this is from 85 to 97. That's why it's so, why my information is old, but it was important. Is it became a corporation in 1986, and that means like any other, like the corporate, the nonprofit that is sponsoring or is holding this event is also a corporation seen by Pennsylvania. Am I correct by that, Darcy? Yes, it's a nonprofit. And so you have to fill out papers, you have to do all sorts of stuff with the Secretary of State's office. It is a really serious thing to do. And the reason why the state makes you do that is because you got to be seen as a serious organization. They got to take you seriously. And there's a whole bunch of hoops that you got to jump through to make that happen. And in 1987, People First in Nebraska applied for and was granted what the federal government calls nonprofit status. And what that means is the organization could apply for and get money from foundations and grants and stuff. So I wanted to tell you, here's some of the money that came in. So from the Governor's Planning Council on Developmental Disabilities, People First Nebraska got an ongoing grant, and they still get it to this day. Woods Charitable Fund granted money for the leadership retreats that I have down there. We had 3 different leadership retreats, and this is for leadership for the advisors and board members. The U.S. Catholic Bishops Campaign for Human Development had a grant available to apply for people who were impoverished, and we know a lot of people with disabilities don't make a lot of money, and so this is an organizing thing, and so it was right up People First in Nebraska's line. So we applied for that and got that, and then there was a grant from the state, an annual grant, where they would provide, I can't remember, it might have been $15,000 to pay for the registration and hotel expenses and meals for the people who would provide support to people to attend the conference. So that was a real problem, is people couldn't find people to go with them, or they didn't have the money to do it. And so one of the things we did is we went to the state to get that going. So we raised quite a bit of money, actually, and it was those were good times. So the total number of chapters grew to 12, and the exciting thing, I think one of the really exciting things during that time is Nancy Ward, who she's a picture of she and Governor Kerry, and she's looking at him this way. She was hired as the People First in Nebraska Self-Advocacy organizer. And so she would go around to the chapters and support them and on the work that they're doing throughout the year, and talk to advisors and do all that stuff. It was a really important thing to link people together. And then we also hired a part-time support person who was there to help support Nancy, give her a ride to places that were hard to get to every so often. So, and the convention grew and grew in attendance, and we were able to raise more money because they started, people would sell ads with local businesses. So they have this convention booklet. And so we'd have ads from all sorts of businesses across the state who would advertise, and they'd pay so much. Well, things are going along really well, and I hate to burst the bubble, but it happens sometimes. And then I just, this is a picture of the wheels coming off, and then the wheels came off. So, and again, I've not told this story for a long time. So what happened? Well, Nancy, other people noticed her strength, which is really, really good. And she's a leader, not only a leader, she's a leader in Nebraska, she's a leader in the nation. And so she had 2 job offers from 2 states and for full-time employment with benefits. with a self-advocacy organizer. So she went to work for People First of Oklahoma, and it was really hard to see her go, but that was an important thing. People First in Nebraska hired a person without a disability to be the advisor to the board, the support person to the board, to do the work that Nancy was doing. Before we thought long and hard about, the problem for Nancy was getting from place to place in the state. We were thinking, somebody who had access to wheels, to a car, and all that stuff would work out better. It turned out to be not a good decision. And it went on for years, and the organization just kind of slowly but surely began to fade. Shirley Dean passed away. She developed cancer several times and then finally passed away. It was devastating. And many supporters who at one point in time supported People First in Nebraska were kind of left or were chased away. The board that was there with this new advisor demanded that Shirley apologize for something she said, and I heard what it was, and it was just it wasn't good. I mean, it was really poisonous. And I would also just say, the history was lost. There was a convention after the new advisor without the disability was hired, and they were talking about the history of People First in Nebraska, and they knew nothing about the history. They knew when they started, and that was it, but they knew nothing about the history of People First in Nebraska. And I thought that was a shame. And what they say is people who do not study history are bound to repeat it. So where does it stand now? I would just say, I don't know. There is a People First in Nebraska. They're not connected with Self-Advocates Becoming Empowered with a national organization. They are connected. I did a little bit of research before we started this to see it looks like they're connected with University Centers on Excellence in Education. The USED is what it's and so they're connected with that, and hopefully they're staying. They're standing firm with their belief in People First. But I talk to Nancy every so often, Nancy Ward in Oklahoma, and I'll ask her, I'll say, so do you ever hear much about them? And she'll say, no, I don't. And I feel bad about that. Whereas at one point in time, it was very connected. So here's some things I want you to think about. So, keeping it near and dear to your heart and what it is. And I wanted Darcy to kind of to explain this, what we're talking about, the it, right, Darcy? This
Right.
is
So the it is the advocacy that we're doing together, people with and without disabilities, and following the lead of the people with developmental disabilities and the people who are providing support being in the background. I think for me, that is really central. So I don't know, John, is that what you wanted? And to keep doing it, to keep
was
doing
also
it. Like, we have a grant now, and it would be important for us to be able to continue past the grant time. We don't want it to just fall apart. That was something I took away. Yeah.
I think remember that that piece from Minnesota where they talked about People First is, and that whole list of things. I keep on thinking that's the guts of it. And I think everybody connected really needs to be clear about what that is. I think that's where you see the original founders of People First, and plus also the advisors and the supporters all were very, very clear about that. And when the wheels fell off, I think it became it wasn't clear one little bit. The other thing is if you see an organization where people without disabilities are the leaders, and it can't be people first. People first really is about,
With
people
people with or without disabilities who are the leaders.
people without disabilities. Did
Okay.
I say that? I'm sorry. Yeah, where people without disabilities are in the leadership roles. They're controlling the organization, and it's supposedly a people first organization. You kind of say, that ain't it. The role of people without disabilities is a really important thing. One of the things that we would spend a lot of time, both at leadership retreats and at the convention, talking about the role of advisors, because there's people that will just take over, and it becomes, it's the whole organization kind of went in that direction, as it was falling apart.
Mhm.
Leadership is also an important thing to think about. Not everybody is a leader, and I think that's a really important thing to think about. You also need workers. You need a variety of talent to make an organization kind of grow and to thrive. And if you don't have leadership, somebody who kind of says it like it is, what's important, and knows it from the bottom of their heart and their soul, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. But you also need the workers. You need the chorus as well as the the director, of everything. Um, the next piece is just recognizing, realizing this is a really radical idea. And again, I think there's a lot of people around that will say, well, that's a really good idea, but then getting, the practice is really, really hard, and they can undermine that. Um, and then the final thing is if there's a clash of interests. So the interests here really has to be about, uh, people first, people with disabilities. This is not about building the host organization, Disability Rights Nebraska, or wherever it is, whatever organization it is. This is about being really focused on people first. That's what people first is about, is being clear. And so you got to be aware that other people try to bring it in or try to take control of it. And then the next thing you know, I guess I think there's a lot of people who are very trusting, and say, yeah, they're here to help us. And yet, they come in and, it can all go south really quickly.
Okay, well, thank you, John. We really appreciate everything that you've shared and I know in a short period of time, it was like a lot. I'm just wondering, we could have time for a few quick questions. Does anybody have a question? You
Well, this
can,
is Debbie. How are you? Can you hear me?
yes, we can hear you, Debbie. Can you hear Debbie, John?
Yes, I can. Hi,
Okay.
Debbie.
Hi, John. You and I are going through the same process. I am the executive director of Speaking for Itself from
Oh,
Pennsylvania, and
yes.
Mark Freeman and Speaking for Itself. We also helped start the National Becoming Empowered.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and I know exactly what you're doing, what that felt like. Because we went through the same thing that you're talking to. Um, and I'm a witness because I went through the whole 9 yards when our support person for Speaking for Herself passed, and I had to take the range, and I understand the whole 9 yards. And I also understand that when people come on board and they're trying to help you in that. Speaking for Itself has gone through that
Yeah.
recently. And Speaking for Itself started in 1982. And
Yeah.
I know Mark Freeman knows all about you guys because he's been down there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just wanted to say I
Yeah.
appreciate your presentation. it just brought me back to what I've had when speaking for self-endured,
Yeah.
and you're right on target because we went through the whole 9 yards, the whole thing. Crash, we did it all. And you're right about one thing. I had to get good people, a team, and we had to regrow speaking for itself all over again and all over again. So we've gone through the whole thing the whole presentation. Speaking for itself has lived
Okay.
it. I have lived it. I have a disability, the first one in Pennsylvania. Um, Speaking for Itself hired me, and I have a disability. The first one disability person that's the executive director of Speaking for Itself. So I appreciate your presentation, and I understand the whole 9 yards that you guys went through because we went through the same
Oh,
thing.
okay, thank you so much. I'm sorry to have to we're running short on
I'm
time.
sorry,
Yeah, no, that
Darcy.
was good. Thank you very much.
It just
No,
brought me back to a lot of memories that we had to go endure.
I know, I know. So
It's,
thank you for your
I was going to say, it's just nice to be affirmed too. Suzanne, that's a really, because I've heard that of other people first groups, and again, it's tricky business, isn't it? Got to be
Okay,
careful. Yeah.
Nicolette, can you unmute and ask your question?
Yeah. Hi, John. I'm 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 Nicolette. I actually am a self-advocate working with Vision for Vision for Equality. So my question is, when you talked about like the think about, how can I educate others to understand what we're coming what we're coming from?
Yeah.
Because I for myself, I get undermined a lot at at work sometimes.
Mhm, mhm.
Boy, I think what I noticed about People First is that when people come together, okay, when we're talking about at a chapter, you have your, this group of people, it's at a chapter here. Hopefully, people can support one another, but maybe that information that I shared from Minnesota, that talks about what People First is, and you could say, this is what it is, and this is what I'm learning, and people can support you, because there's a lot of people that aren't going to out there. That you face down a lot of naysayers, and so I think you need support. I think you need supportive people behind you to help support you, and the information. And there's some people that just aren't going to pay any attention, but you've got to pay attention to the people who are going to listen to you, going to honor that about you, I think.
And we can maybe we can join together, Nicolette. That's something like low wages for people with disabilities and not getting raises, is also another issue for people with disabilities. It might be something that we would want to take on uh as a
That's a great thing, Darcy. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, John, I want to thank you so much for your presentation. It was really wonderful. I know that you put a lot of work into it. I'm trying to
I'm
show,
rusty.
no, you're good.
I'm rusty.
Yeah, I'm trying to do the little clapping thing for you, John, but
uh,
uh
don't No clapping.
Please just show your appreciation to John, like, he did a lot of work to prepare that presentation. And so we thank you for all the work you did, and we wish we could spend more time with you, but maybe you will, give us some information, some more information at another time.
Yeah.
Hey,
It
and
was
we,
a pleasure. It was a pleasure and good luck to all of you. Okay. I mean
thank
that.
you. We'll take these lessons, John, and the ideas. I wrote down a lot of ideas for us.
Have a scoot, Darcy. So you guys take care. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.